Good afternoon. Welcome to the Creative Problem Solving for Supervisors webinar. Before we get moving, we're going to do some housekeeping here. You can use your computer speakers or your headset for the audio. And if you need technical assistance, you can dial 1-800-504-5379. And during the webinar, I'll be separating out times and reminding you that we're going to do some question and answers. You can click on the Q&A tab below my video to type your questions or comments. Feel free to do that throughout the webinar, even though I will remind you that there will be times where I'll stop and pause to answer some of your questions. Also, after the webinar, you'll receive an email with the PowerPoints, the webinar evaluation to complete, and the requested CEU certificate, along with the link for the recorded sessions. Today we're going to talk about problem solving, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of problems. We're going to do an overview of the creative problem solving model and get into some tools and methods for implementation. And throughout this discussion, we're going to also talk about creative thinking and how we can improve our ways to creativity and creative problem solving. Just to outline, these are three general types of problems. We either have disagreement or conflict, there's a crisis or emergency, or we have technical or visionary problems or concerns. I outline these types of problems to distinguish and show how we respond differently to the different types of problems. For example, a disagreement or conflict, we have mediation, facilitation, or discussion between each other or within groups. For a crisis or emergency, we respond immediately and we stabilize the situation. And for technical or visionary, we have rational methods or creative problem solving, or some are familiar with strategic planning. Today we're going to focus on the creative problem solving or the visionary types of problems and not the other two. So to get us started, I want to talk about creativity in general in this definition on the slide, as the ability to use imagination to transcend ideas, rules, patterns, relationships, or the like, and to create meaningful new ideas, forms, or methods. This is where I'd like you to start to think and maybe jot down and consider why, and share if you feel comfortable, you think you might be creative. We'll be exploring some of the skills that make people creative or help people become or enhance their creativity throughout this presentation. Everyone can practice creative thinking and increase their creativity. And in general, to be creative, one must have content knowledge about a subject matter. For example, if you're in addiction treatment, you have to have content knowledge. You have to have a structure and a format of understanding the content before you can be creative. For example, implementing evidence-based practices. You have to have interest and you have to be motivated to want to be creative and change the way things are happening. And you have to have the ability to be original or think outside of the box and be open to ideas and a different way of doing things. As you can see by the list for creative thinking, I want you to take a look at these and examine the things that you are familiar with, things that pop out for you that you do on a day-to-day basis in your work. Jot down some things, if you will, and also take a note of the items that don't necessarily seem obvious, things that you might not practice regularly. In order to enhance our creative thinking, it's important to consider the things that we don't routinely do and practice some of these other things. For example, I like to come up with new ideas for things, but I don't necessarily like to analyze those ideas. So for me to enhance my creative thinking, I would practice analyzing and developing my possibilities. I want to do the overview of the creative problem-solving model. Generally, it has its roots in work by Alex Osborn and Sidney Parnes. Alex Osborn was an advertising executive who realized that his advertising his advertising staff had a hard time coming up with more and more ideas, and they would continue to discuss ideas and argue about ideas and judge each other's ideas, and Osborn wasn't getting what he needed because he wanted some innovative, crazy, zany ideas for his advertising firm. So he kept watching the process, and he decided that it's time to create rules and structure around the brainstorming idea, and that's where he created the brainstorming rules. So he moved forward with these rules to generate more and more ideas, and he met up with a guy named Sid Parnes, who also said, well, it's okay that we come up with all these ideas, but then what? How do we get them into action? So he and Sid Parnes created the creative problem-solving model back in the 40s and 50s and started testing it at Buffalo State College. And what they found was that creative problem-solving is a natural process. We all do it. We don't realize that we do it. And there are ways that we can make it more explicit so that we could practice those pieces that we don't necessarily feel comfortable with. So built around the basic tool of brainstorming, Parnes added a convergent process. So brainstorming is a divergent process, and Parnes added the convergent tools that help us select these ideas from the brainstorming. And what they outlined as their model was all about starting from the beginning. We might have a mess, if you will, and what's going on in the world. If we wanted to solve the world's problems, what are they? And we'd create a list of what the mess is. And then we'd have to move to the next stage that they would indicate is about collecting data about those problems or those issues, and also digging deeper into the problem to help define what the problem really is, instead of knee-jerking and saying this is there's only one way, there's only one problem, there's only one way to find the solution. And then the next stage would be creating and collecting ideas from a bunch of people in order to help build the solutions to some of the problems. And then the next stage would be solution finding, and then moving those solutions into action planning. Really remembering the smaller pieces isn't as important as understanding that this is a continuous cycle of diverging and converging. We're going to get into that later when I talk about the tools. You can look up the creative problem-solving model, and you'll also see that there are several models, several varieties and modified variations of the creative problem-solving model. For example, there's a condensed three-tiered model that I like to use more frequently, and it's just a simple version. It's identify what the problem or the goal or the challenge is, generate ideas about that problem or that goal or that challenge, and select and find ways to put those ideas into action. So generally, it's identify the problem, generate ideas, and put those ideas into action. Another model that's very common is used in lean manufacturing. Some of you may be familiar with this, is plan, do, study, and act. And that's the model that it's similar to problem-solving model in that there's divergent and convergent tools. And then as you see, it's illustrated here on the slide, find the cause of the problem, creative problem solving by creating new ideas, generating new ideas for that problem, selecting and choosing the best way to approach that problem or challenge, and then anticipate any bumps in the road as you move forward to implement the plan. It doesn't matter which outline we use. The important thing, again, is to note the divergent and convergent thinking. Again, we're going to get into that as we go along. I wanted to take a note before moving on about the gathering of the information. A lot of times, especially in our busy lives, we knee-jerk react to issues or concerns. Perhaps we move quickly into solutions for what seems to be a crisis or an emergency, and it's not necessarily a crisis or an emergency. It's important to take time to gather the right information from the varieties of people and sources about the issue. It's a slower, the creative problem-solving model slows us down a little bit, but it slows us down in that we look for the right problem, try to find the right solutions to that problem. Albert Einstein said when he was asked the question, if you could solve the world's problems and you had 60 minutes to do it, how would you handle it? He said, I would spend 55 minutes figuring out what the problem is and 5 minutes solving that problem. So just to give you a analogy to that. Before we move into digging deeper into the tools, the divergent and convergent tools, because we're going to share some examples, I want to talk about blocks to our creativity. And there's some common things that block us or keep us from being more creative. And it's more important not only to be aware of these blocks, but as we move forward in practicing not only tools, but being more and more aware of what these blocks are and trying to overcome them. For example, as managers and clinicians and supervisors I mentioned earlier, we often respond quickly to answers or issues. We also at times respond to a one-sided issue. Someone comes to us and says something is happening, and we respond to that and fix that issue before we consider or look into other potential issues or another side to the story. So we make assumptions based on what's presented to us, and we respond to those assumptions without digging deeper into the facts or the other pieces of the story. It's important to seek facts. I can't say that enough. We got to dig deeper into what's really happening on different points of view and collect data so that we can be better informed to come up with solutions for the problem. Again, we're talking about visionary types of problems, not necessarily emergencies. When someone falls out and has a heart attack or there's a crisis in your clinic, you don't want to stop and ask everybody what they think about that. It's important that we're talking about the visionary type of problems or issues. When we gather the data about an issue, sometimes the solution becomes more and more obvious, and it's easier to actually solve the problem. Another block or barrier to creativity is criticism. And I don't mean downright criticism as illustrated in this picture, but even subtle criticism. When someone comes to us with an idea, some typical responses are, well, we can't do that, management won't accept that, management won't allow us to do that, we don't have resources for that, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough time. And some of the common ones is we tried that before, and this is the way we're going to do it, this is the way we've always done it, and that's how it works. So as you generate some ideas and questions for the webinar, do these seem familiar? Do you have others that you'd like to add to this list? And of course, our overburdened paperwork is also a barrier to us being more creative. We're overburdened. We have to write things down. We have to document, and that's important. But for me, as a manager and a supervisor, I think it's important, part of my role, to reduce some of the redundancies, to reduce some of the paperwork, to get rid of some of the waste so that the clinicians and our teammates can be more creative, to enhance and do better things and work smarter and not harder. And of course, another barrier is rules. And I'm speaking of not just explicit rules that are important, because rules are important. We need rules to carry on in our day, and we have to abide by regulations that are important. But there's also the hidden implicit rules. For example, that's the way we've always done it. Or I don't know who told us we have to do it this way, but we continue to do it that way. Rules can stifle us to challenge, and I think it's important for us as leaders to challenge the status quo when it's appropriate. Why do we have this rule? Is it still important today? Is it still meaningful? Can we adapt it? Can we change it? Did we ask the right questions? And asking why once isn't always sufficient. Toyota manufacturing uses what they call the 5 whys, or in lean manufacturing they use the 5 whys. So when you're moving forward to question some of the status quo, consider asking why more than once. Why is this rule in place? Ask again, why? And keep getting answers until you find a possibility to adjust or change the rule. I was going to stop here for a second to see if there's any questions, comments, or answers. Not answers. Yeah, answers. questions or comments about the content this far. Okay, so now what? I have a question. Now I need you to answer it. No, we're going to actually get into now what. So now what? We've reviewed the concepts of creativity, creative thinking a little bit. We got into the concepts of creative thinking. We just reviewed blocks and barriers to creativity, as well as the overview of the creative problem-solving model. Again, to summarize that it's divergent versus convergent thinking tools. So what can we do? And as I carry on, whether you have a question or comment that you want from me or others, jot down some things that you could use moving forward. We'll stop again for opportunity for question and answer as well after going through the divergent tools. So, for example, I think it's important to start exploring the language we use, and this is one of the most poignant things that I took away from my learning of the creative problem-solving model in the creativity world. I mentioned it earlier that we often say things like, we can't, it won't work, management won't approve this, we don't have the resource, we don't have enough money. But I was taught, and I practice, and I keep continuing practicing, because it's important to practice any skill. Instead of saying we can't or it won't work, flip that the other way into a more positive way that helps actually generate ideas better. So instead of someone saying we can't, how can we do this? It won't work, well, how can we make it work? How can we make or convince management to accept this proposal? And or how can we obtain the resources or do something creative to get the resources that we need to implement this new idea? I have an example that I want to share about a colleague who came to me preparing for an interview. He was interviewing for an advancement in his job. And he kept talking about everything he didn't have for this job. I don't know anything about budgets. I don't know how to really supervise people. And I gave him feedback about that, saying, number one, because he was my friend, I could say it right head on. Well, with that kind of attitude, I don't know that I'd want to accept you in this promotion. But it's important to flip the way you're saying things around. This is what I do bring to the table. I don't have enough experience with budgets, but I've done my own personal budget, and I find it's very important to keep it in check, and I monitor it all the time. And I'm really interested and willing to go to courses so that I can be better at financial management. And another example I gave him as well, or to share, is I don't have formal supervision experience, but I have mentored people in school, and I have mentored people in my life, and I'm passionate about supervision, and I really know about this. I know about this course that I want to take, and I'll go to that course as well. So instead of being always negative, or I can't, or I don't have, how can you sell the idea that, well, I'll be willing to obtain it. I'll look into ways we can obtain it. Similarly, we can encourage our staff by asking them questions like this. If they pose a question to you or an idea or a new way of doing something, instead of knee-jerking and saying, well, we don't have time or money or resources for that, ask them to explore by saying, well, have you thought about the barriers to this issue? Have you thought about ways that we could do this? Who else might help us? Who else might help you? Can you outline your idea that covers these questions or concerns? And then at least they feel energized and at least heard, and then you could explore the idea even further together with them. So it's all about practicing, modeling, and encouraging all the possibilities, not only for your team, but for yourself. Instead of thinking in terms of negative, how we can't, consider how can we? What are some ways that we can do this? And who are the resources that we have that we could tap into to help us move forward and create an environment that's open to ideas? Changing how you approach a challenge and becoming open to the ideas from your team members helps us change the environment and opens up creativity and fun, actually, on the team. I remember counselors coming to me after I practiced some of these tools, and they had an issue about engaging people in group. And I said, well, what are your thoughts about what's happening? Why do you think this isn't happening? Because typically I would have had all the answers, right? Because I'm the supervisor and I have all the answers. No. So I asked them, why do you think it's happening? What do you think might help? Well, they already had thoughts about all that, and that's the key. Our folks that are doing the work know and have ideas about the work. We often don't pose the questions to them about what they think can be changed or improved. So they had a list of things that they wanted to do differently to improve it. It didn't take any resources, and I said, well, what do you need from me? And they said, we just need you to approve it. And I said, okay, go ahead. It didn't take any time. There was no complaining, there was no arguing, there was no bickering, and they carried on and implemented the solution. So it can get fun, and I think the best thing for me in creating the environment this way is that when we open up the environment for ideas, we get the team to start considering options, questioning the status quo, so you have to be prepared for that and be open to that. They become open to the challenge. They become open to each other's ideas, whether they like each other or not, and it gets exciting, and people get energized to want to do their jobs because they feel it's exciting. And then everybody starts to trust and get more transparent about what their thoughts or their concerns are about the environment or what's going on in the unit or the place of work. Some other things you could do is constantly get the team involved. When someone comes to me, a manager comes to me and says, well, I want to do this in my team, I want to change this or I want to change that, I always start with, what does your team think? Have you asked your team? Have you brought this up with them? And I encourage them to use team brainstorming. Many of us have been familiar or maybe exposed to brainstorming. And mentioned earlier, this is one of the divergent tools of the creative problem-solving models. And we're going to review some of these moving forward now, and I'm going to stop in a second to also ask you for if you have any questions or comments that you want me to explore. But asking your team to just make a list on your grease board in your team room or on a newsprint, what are ideas you have for this? Asking them to generate some ideas is really an important thing when someone comes up with a suggestion. Josh, do we have any questions? We have a comment from Jamie that indicates criticism can come in the form of living inside a box. And that's important. That's interesting, Jamie, because being inside a box feels constraining, and we're bound by rules. On the other hand, though, what researchers have found in studying creativity is that having structure, not necessarily living in a box that's constraining, but that having structure on how to do something, whether it's the right way or the wrong way to do something, a structure that's followed enhances our ability to be creative about that structure. So there's a dichotomy there of living inside a box, yes, can keep us constrained, but being able to have structure actually helps us become more creative. And rules should be made by the team of the organization many times instead of an individual. Does anybody else have a comment or a reaction to Jamie's comment about rules should be made by the team of the organization many times instead of an individual? No responses? Well, it's great to have generated some thoughts about this whole concept, and I think it's like we do group counseling, and we have rules and norms that we present to a group, and as Jamie indicated in her thoughts and comments, rules are also asked and enhanced by the team in the group. We ask them, do you have any other norms that you want us to follow? Is everybody willing to follow these norms? So that's a really good point, Jamie. Thank you. So now we'll get into the specific examples about tools. Checking in with Josh. Are there other questions before we move on? Okay, before we move on, we have a question. This helps the senior team players take ownership in implementing the rules. Absolutely. And that's the whole thing about ideas, and that's the whole thing about getting the team involved. I find that I experience that as well. The more and more I get the team involved, they take ownership, they follow through with things more frequently, they get more excited about what's going on at work. So very good point. Thanks, Jamie, again. Any others? We'll dig a little deeper into some of the Divergent tools. Please keep submitting your questions, and I'll stop to answer them after we're done with the Divergent tools. So here's an example slide of brainstorming with Post-it notes. Some of you may have experienced this. It's one of the most popular Divergent tools, and it's all about generating a list of ideas. If you have an idea about, well, what kind of or how are we going to change the world or implement an evidence-based practice, for example, in our world, we would ask our team to write down ideas and post them up, and we'll post them up on a board similar to what you're seeing here. Another example of brainstorming, instead of doing it out loud, where we'd be sharing ideas in a team out loud, saying them out loud, putting them on the board, it gets energized and exciting. It's also an alternate way to do brainstorming is by brain writing. So instead of writing it up on a grease board or up on a newsprint, we could write down ideas or have the team write down ideas, called brain writing. So it's quiet. We ask people to write down ideas. We could pass the pieces of paper around the room to have others add to those ideas, because it's important to piggyback off of other ideas. So folks could write down ideas, pass their papers around. It's a little bit more quiet. Folks who generate ideas out loud, somebody like me, can overpower the team and overpower the quiet ones. So brain writing is a good tool to use when a team is new, when you have new team members that might be too shy to share their ideas. And it's also good to keep people like me quiet, because I share a lot of ideas out loud all the time. So it's a different way to brainstorm and get something done, get ideas on the paper as well. Another Divergent tool is called mind mapping. It's actually generating ideas in a more structured way, as you see here. As a matter of fact, mind mapping guidelines is one of the examples of this mind map. So what you do is you take your general concept. In this example, mind mapping guidelines is the concept. And you'll see branched out are headings. What's needed for mind mapping guidelines: clarity, center, style, keywords, and the use of a mind map. And literally you see branching off from those topics are even more details of that topic. And you keep going and you keep going. As you see, some of the branches have more ideas, they're more enhanced, they have more things, and that's typical. Mind maps could be used for personal goal setting, problem solving, obviously. Writing a business plan is a good way to use a mind map. Generating any kind of idea about a concept. And I think one of the ones that's really neat to use for here is if you're considering implementing evidence-based practice, and I'll illustrate that as well. Screenwriters, book writers also use mind mapping because they have a general concept or an idea, and they have some subtitles and they want to enhance, and what kind of other branches do they need to add to their concept. So here's a simple version. Implementing evidence-based practice. Which ones? Which one are we going to implement? Is it going to be motivational interviewing, 12-step facilitation, buprenorphine, or one of my favorites, motivational incentives? We also have to identify the clinic need. What are some things we have to identify in the clinic need? Types of clients that we serve, the counselor's expertise. Do we have anybody that knows anything about these particular evidence-based practices? And then also the resources. What do we need? Do we need money? Do we need training? Do we need supplies? Do we need a project manager or an expert? So I just wanted to share an example relative to the work that we do in mental health and addiction treatment. When you use a mind map, you start to get the details of what your action plan is going to look like. As you could see, we might see that, well, the first thing we have to do is decide which evidence-based practice are we going to use. And then the next step of our action plan would be to explore the clinic need and assess the clinic's need, and then gathering the resources. And you can put that all down in an action plan that I'll illustrate later when we get into Convergent Tools. And certainly most important, I have to share with you the rules that Alex Osborn created when he began his work with Sid Parnes and creating the creative problem-solving model, which actually was by accident. They weren't set out to do that. He was set out to help people generate more and more ideas. So his rules are no judging or discussing the ideas. This is the hardest thing to get people to do. And it's one of the things that I practice and encourage people to practice over and over and over again. Because I'm telling you, even now, even though I'm very cognizant of it, I judge ideas all the time. I think we all do. And judgment is positive or negative. Oh, that's a great idea, or oh, that's not a great idea. Judging quickly gets us into that knee-jerk reaction of wanting to implement that idea or solution. It's important to seek quantity. It's important to piggyback off of each other's ideas and also seek novelty. What Osborn and Parnes realized when playing around with these brainstorming rules was that the first third ideas that a group will come up with are the typical ideas that you could probably guess if you were sitting by yourself. The second third amount of ideas are usually a little bit more creative. And then if you push beyond and keep going, the last third are more of your innovative, creative, and zany ideas. And sometimes they're pretty out there stuff. But it might seem far-fetched, but sometimes that zany, novel idea is really what breaks you outside of that box and gets you to think to do something new and exciting. I see some questions coming in, so now I'm going to pause because we're going to transition from Divergent Tools to Convergent Tools. So I'm going to stop and see what we have out there for questions. And I apologize, I saw that Jamie corrected me, and it's Jaime, so thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I actually had a dear friend and colleague as a child or friend as a kid, and his name was Jaime, so sorry about that. It seems to me that this style of problem solving goes in line with macro managing. I find those who macro manage use this set of skills, while micromanagers are not as responsive to this style of problem solving. AJ, thank you. That's really, it's really an interesting thing because it's true. I mean, if you think about managers or supervisors and their skill level or their style, as a new manager, I probably was less open to ideas. And it kind of goes back to having content knowledge or having understanding of what's going on. And when I started my new job, I'm not ready to change the world right away because I have to get a lay of the land. I have to get an understanding of what's going on. So perhaps in a similar vein, it's really about getting comfortable with what's going on, being comfortable being a manager, being comfortable with the content of what our roles and responsibilities are before we can get more macro, if you will. So that's a really good point. Any other questions? Comments? Suggestions? Is anybody willing to share if they think they're creative and are open to ideas? A suggestion that I have, and I'm using here, is pausing when we ask people questions. A lot of times people have to process the information and take time to think about what their answer is. And oftentimes we also, like knee-jerking to an issue, we also are quick to answer the questions or fill the quiet space after we ask a question. Someone once told me when I was doing a training of trainers, said for me to count to 6 or 7 after asking a question, and sometimes 6 or 7 seconds seems like forever. But it's a good thing to practice, to give people time to contemplate and think about their questions or comments. Again, keep them coming as we move into Convergent Tools. The Convergent Tools, and actually the Convergent style of creative thinking, is actually the time where we put all the pieces together, where we narrow down the ideas. This is the time actually to judge the ideas and to really examine them and analyze the ideas. some of the tools that I'm going to share today here with you, and there's several tools. You could actually, if you Google brainstorming or Convergent creative tools, you'll find a lot other tools and other websites that you can find more information. But one of the common ones you might be familiar with is the pros and cons list that's actually used in motivational interviewing. You get folks to identify what are the good things about the idea, what are the barriers or the not so good things about the idea. And it's important when you use that example to not stop at the cons and say, well, that's a bad idea, so let's scrap that idea and put it in the trash. Let's explore the barriers and see if we can overcome some of them. Another tool that I'm going to talk about are hits and clusters. So hits are when you select the ideas that you came up with in a brainstorming session. And a cluster is putting them in categories that we can move forward with. And lastly, I'm going to highlight what's called rank ordering or prioritizing a list of ideas. So you see, we diverged, spreading our thoughts and ideas out, and now we're going to focus on bringing it in and focusing in and narrowing things down. So it's diverge physically and converge. So you see an illustration of our brainstorming ideas that we had earlier. And this is an example of ideas that were chosen using what we called hits. If you've ever experienced a brainstorming session, a lot of times the facilitator or the person leading this session would have given you sticky dots that are made by 3M and others. You could find them in an office store or even Kmart. And you would actually have your group select, perhaps if there's a lot of ideas, you might say, okay, you have 5 sticky dots or 10 sticky dots at the most. 10 is a lot. 5 to 10 sticky dots to select from this list of ideas what you think are good ideas that we have the energy and resources to move forward with, that we feel excited about and make sense, and that also might take us a little bit outside of our typical box that we've been operating from. What you also see are not only the ones that have been hit were placed up on the screen, but they've also been grouped, for an example here, in categories, and that's the clustering. So, for example, the square that you see with great job, planned outage, offer incentives, increased revenue, that might be a theme about incentives and using incentives. The improved communication and the announcement square is about communication. So in front of us we have perhaps 6 examples. One is incentives, one is communication, one is a schedule change, one is make improvements in the left corner, the outdated, update, and upgrade, make some sort of improvements, and then the last one is a fire drill. So as you see, there's out there ideas that people choose, and I want to point that out, and I left the fire drill out there because it's important that we keep in some of the ideas that seem outside of where we're headed, because they might be important. They might be important to what we're moving forward with. And it's hard sometimes it's hard. We want to stay in a structure. It's important to keep some of those external, extraneous ones on the list of things to do. The rank order, and I'll share an example of it after I go through how to do a rank order. A rank ordering is a convergent tool that's used when you have 10 or fewer things to prioritize. So as you see in the cartoon, reduce, recycle, reuse. Reduce was prioritized as the number one issue, and reuse and recycle after that. So you make your list, and you could do this as a team. You could have your team do this. You could do this yourself. You could take the list and prioritize it yourself. And where you go first is you say, choose the one that stands out to you as your favorite, the one that you really, heads and shoulders above all the others. You want to number that number 1. And if you have 10 ideas, then the next thing you want to do is choose the one that you don't have a lot of energy for. It didn't stand out, but it's still important. We'll number that number 10. And then you layer back and forth and you go back up to number 2. Now what's your next most favorite? Because then those ambivalent kind of ones that you're not sure of end up somewhere in the middle, and you don't really have to spend a lot of time and energy thinking too hard about where they go in the rank order. The example I use is I was working with a team of managers that I didn't know very well, and I could sense that they didn't communicate all the time and they didn't always agree with each other. So I sent them an email and I asked them to identify the top 3 things. So I'm brainstorming with them in an email. I want you to list top 3 to 5 things that you think are important for management to focus on for improving the organization. Please respond to me only. This is anonymous. I'm not going to put your names attached to your ideas. And that was because I thought that there was some trust issues. There were some new people on the team. People didn't know each other well enough. They were all over the area and they didn't work day to day with each other. So sometimes making things anonymous makes people feel more safe to share their ideas. So they sent me their anonymous emails. I put the list together anonymously and put like things together in a list. And I sent the email back to them. And I asked them to rank order because the list had, I think, fewer than 10, maybe it had about 9 or 10 items on there. So I asked them to rank order them in this very way. I sent them the directions and asked them to anonymously send me this list back. So then I put all their lists together and numbered the most popular one. And when I was able to come to their meeting, I presented their list of ideas, and it was evident that they all agreed in a consensus, without even speaking with each other, that they all agreed with that number 1 issue. And then we move forward with generating ideas about what does that issue mean to everybody? Can we explore what are the details? And that's when we moved into the problem-solving piece of gathering more data about that. What does this mean to people? What are the problems? What are the issues? How do you define this? And we kept working on that for a couple of weeks before we even generated ideas to find solutions. So rank ordering is a nice way to prioritize. I use the example of how to do it in a more anonymous way so people feel more safe. And they could be anonymous and share their ideas without feeling like they're going to be judged or criticized. If we use the clusters from the previous page, we might list incentives, improvements, communication, schedule change, and fire drills, and put that all on the table or have folks write it down and rank order those things. That will end up in an action plan. And here's an example of an action plan. After selecting and prioritizing the ideas, it's really important to follow through with putting these ideas to action and following up with them. So this is just one example. As you see, it's not too dissimilar to a treatment plan. Treatment plan that would have, like if we use the SMART acronym, for example, they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're time sensitive. So if we used our clustering and rank ordered communication as our number 1 item, we might put communication as our short-term goal, that we're going to improve communication. We're going to explore what types of communications we use, who's going to do it, by when, and how are we going to follow up, or when are we going to follow up. It's important to use and really write down an action plan in this kind of way and bring it to your monthly meetings or bring it to a forum where you could check regularly on the progress of the action. Because where you lose people's ideas or energy to share ideas is when they don't ever see their ideas come to fruition. So over time, if they don't ever see their ideas coming to life, they figure, why should I share my ideas anyway? It's important to be supportive of the ideas in the action plan as well. It may not be you that's doing the idea, implementing all the ideas, but it's important for you as a leader, for us as leaders, to follow up and check in. Because sometimes things change in the course of our plan for action. We might need to make adjustments to some of these plans and ideas. As far as the timing for the plan for action, short term, you can really develop it yourself. It depends on what the issues are. It depends on what the solutions could be. You might need more time. I separate it out as short term could be 0 to 3 months. Intermediate would be 3 to 6 months. Long term could be 6 to 12 months. But again, Depending on situations, I've also narrowed that down to I need to get something moving quickly. My short term was 0 to 30 days. My intermediate was 30 to 60 days. And my long term was 90 days to 6 months, depending on, again, what the issues are. I'm going to slow down, take some time for questions, thoughts, and comments about anything that we've covered so far, including recently the Convergent Tools. So AJ says, with giving the staff the ability to put in their input, how do you let them implement their ideas without letting go of your authority? Well, that's the $60 million question. But I'll ask that a question again and encourage others to chime in their thoughts and ideas, because it's important that I'm not the only one sharing ideas. So AJ says, with giving the staff the ability to put in their input, how do you let them implement their ideas without letting go of your authority? I know everybody's generating ideas while I contemplate a response. I have a couple of comments about it because I don't have the ultimate answer. I think there's probably lots of answers to this comment question. One piece is when you do it as a team, you're a part of that. You're a part of those idea generations. So you may be a part of the idea. Maybe it was 1 or 2 staff that came up with that idea. Your authority piece does not get usurped by saying, yes, let's do this. In my opinion, it gets actually more enhanced because you support their ideas, you encourage them. Your authority lies in supporting their ideas, providing them resources to implement their ideas, and also making sure that when they're implementing their ideas or their suggestions, that you keep them in line with the structure that's important. What are the rules? What are the regulations? What are the policies? What do we have to do? Jaime suggests that we set up the rules for engagement for them to implement. That sounds really awesome and intriguing. I'd like to hear more about what you mean by that. I might infer setting up rules for engagement for them to implement might mean how we're going to go about implementing. You have to check in with me as your manager. You have to follow up with someone, which is really maybe the follow-up section on this plan for action. Who do you have to check in with? Was I on target, Jaime? Any other thoughts and comments? I think using employees, Amy chimes in. Thanks, Amy. I think using employees' ideas shows good leadership. It's okay as an authority figure to allow others to lead. And I think it is actually quite valuable if employees do feel they are able to act as a leader in a group as well. Very nicely put. Nicely put. I find servant leadership is extremely important, and part of what we do as leaders is enhancing others to become leaders as well, and that could be an informal leadership. Jaime agrees. I expanded on his comment. Thanks, Jaime. Again, in summary, as far as that whole concept about implementing and sharing ideas and motivating others to implement ideas and not feel like we're losing our role as their leader, I think it's so important, again, to reiterate that we provide the structure for this. That's where our leadership comes in. We provide the structure and the foundation, and again, the tools and the resources. I have another new question coming in. Keep them coming. This is great. And as the question's coming in, I'm going to ask you a provocative question to share your thoughts or ideas about maybe a goal or a challenge that's kind of been smoldering in your mind or in your workplace. And do you find that some of the information that's shared today useful for you to move forward with gathering your team up and exploring that problem or goal or challenge more deeply? So Jaime asks a question, what about personality theory and creativity? For example, giving our people the temperament indicator to qualify their type. Does this not help in encouraging our people to be creative by not putting a square in a peg, round hole situation? Does this help in encouraging our people to be creative by not putting a square in a round hole peg, I presume, situation? So Jaime, I gather that you know a lot about creativity by your comments and questions. This is great. I'm not an expert in personality theory, but I certainly can make a comment about temperament indicators, perhaps such as Myers-Briggs type indicator, and there's actually a creative problem-solving instrument called the Foresight. And I'm actually going to spell out that website, and I will offer my email later if you need me to help follow up with resources as well. But the Foresight is F-O-U-R, the number 4, S-I-G-H-T ForesightOnline.com. So it's F-O-U-R SIGHTONLINE.com. And actually the Foresight measures one's preference in the problem-solving process, which again, I said earlier, is a natural process that we all go through. If we actually slowed down the problems that we've solved, we'd find that we went through a similar process of generating ideas, considering the best options, and then implementing them. The Foresight Instrument, again, measures someone's preference, not ability, in the problem-solving model, because we all have the ability to do all of these steps. We just feel more comfortable, or we have more energy for certain parts of the problem-solving model. For example, if you ask me to come up with ideas for something, I'll go blah, 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 and give you a gazillion list of ideas. I love to generate ideas, and that's one of the pieces of the problem-solving model. And I mentioned earlier, I'm not so good at analyzing and studying those ideas and spending time drudging through the details. And I had a colleague of mine who loved to analyze and develop the ideas. So we were a good pair on a team, because I blah, blah, blah'd all the ideas, and she went back to her office and put them in a nice linear fashion in a nice binder, and we were just the dynamic duo, if I have to say so. But it's important as far as the personality preferences and temperaments perhaps do have something to do with one's, not abilities, but preferences, their style of how they solve problems, their temperament in the workplace. I know for me, again, I'm an idea generator. I like to come up with lots of ideas, and I'm noisy. So I can squelch the quiet ones, and that's maybe about temperament. And I know that I have to be in touch with that as a leader, that there's quiet people in the room, that I have to scan the room just as we would in a group setting and make sure that I check in with the quiet folks, that I slow the process down for the folks that are energized and sharing ideas outwardly, that I touch base with the quieter ones and make sure that, yes, I enhance, because everybody can be creative. one more addition to that thought about temperament and style. There's different ways to be creative. Some people are creative, they make something out of nothing. But then there are those that are creative in that they change incrementally what's already been created. So they improve upon what's already done. And there are different approaches, there are different styles of being creative. So again, that shows the diversity on your team as well. You may have someone that just wants to maintain the status quo and make small changes. As we know, a lot of people change at different paces. And then you have your team members that want to change the world tomorrow and turn it upside down. And yes, so understanding your people and their different temperaments and styles are very important to enhance everyone's creativity. Amy asks a question, how do you get people who tend to be more analytic and less creative to engage in creative problem solving without them becoming bored or disinterested? All right, buy the Foresight Online Instrument. And that'll help enhance, because everybody's creative. Even the analytic thinkers are creative. As I mentioned, some people like to fix what's already made, enhance something that's already made. But that's a really good question, because you're right, Amy, analytical thinkers, I drive them pretty crazy. They don't want me to keep going on and on and on. They want to really talk about the idea. What you could do with that divergence of style, your analytic folks are going to be the ones that help you do the clusters and the hits and narrow down the ideas. They're going to be the ones that are more energized by converging. So it's a really nice team enhancement, because I'll go blah, blah, blah for a half hour and put all the ideas on the grease board. And then you want to maybe diplomatically kind of push me to be, now it's time to be quiet, time to converge, time to judge the ideas. And that's where you're going to bring your analytic thinkers into the mix. That's where they're going to have more energy. That's where they're going to be creative. And that's where they're going to challenge things, because I'll change the world and turn it upside down and we'll all fall off because I didn't analyze the situation good enough. But our analytic thinkers will stop me from turning the world upside down and say, well, we got to slow down a little bit because we got to think about this, we got to think about that, we got to do this, we got to do that. And your analytic thinkers will actually become part of that process. Great questions. We have others? Comments? Great. We have some more questions coming in. AJ, ultimately, you and your staff are working together toward a common goal, and that this may include delegating authority to allow your team to implement their ideas. Absolutely. Delegating authority, sharing authority, working together to implement. I think the common goal is really, really important. And I think that's what I like most about this process, is that even though there might be differing ideas, there might be different avenues to get to the solution, through this process, through this strategic planning, through this creative problem-solving process, you actually do find bubbling up to the surface is a common theme. And the team sees that as well, and are more willing to put aside the differences because of that common goal. Really good comment. Jaime indicates collaborator style of leadership is the way to go, in my opinion. That's really important. Collaboration for creative problem solving, and strategic planning style of leadership is, I guess if I sat down and really see, now I'm not an analytic thinker, I'm going to knee-jerk and respond to you, Jaime. But if I slowed myself down and quieted myself down, I'd ask other people at this point to comment on that comment. Collaborator style is the best leadership style to go. What do others think about that? What other styles are there out there of leadership that may or may not be the way to go? And does it depend on what type of problem or solution or goal you're looking for. Send me your comments on that one. Jaime indicates figuring out the team player's personality type. For example, Jaime, I assume you want me to share this. I am an ESTJ, and place the environment situation that most motivates them to accomplish the mission. So, if we were doing a Myers-Briggs type indicator training, I would tell you everything about what ESTJ means, but I know what the ESTJ letters mean, and that means Jaime is a extrovert, he's sensing, he's a thinker, and he's a judger. What that means as far as his profile, I haven't memorized the 16 domains of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. But your example, Jaime, talks about your personality type and that you place the environment and the situation as an important piece of what motivates them to accomplish the mission. So what I'd ask the audience is, what kind of things do you do to create an environment that enhances creative thinking? What kind of things do you do, Jaime, as an ESTJ that sets the foundation for situations where your team are sharing thoughts and ideas and coming up with action plans for work? Any questions or comments coming in? There's one coming in. Jaime indicates, in general, I believe collaborator style works best under normal situations, and I believe in exceptions. Took the words right out of my mouth, Jaime, because I was thinking about the different types of problems that I talked about earlier in the presentation, that a collaborating style of leadership in a moment of a crisis might not be the appropriate situation to use collaboration, because you're really stabilizing a situation, an urgency, and getting the situation stable. And a lot of times I always think about health-related issues, or if someone fell out in our clinic, and we wouldn't necessarily collaborate in that moment with a bunch of folks. We would, stabilize the situation, move that situation to where that crisis is being fixed. And then perhaps thereafter, use our collaborative style to reflect on that situation. Did we do everything okay? Is there anything we could have done differently? Is it something in the system that may or may not have been better for us to handle this type of crisis or emergency? It's a good point about the collaborator style has its place, and definitely has its place in facilitating problem solving with team members. Comment here as well, encouraging others to also add their thoughts or ideas to this. I give my team personality indicator and print their personality profile out for them. I presume that this means that this is a way to get people to know each other and to understand their differences or similarities, and how they could use and enhance those similarities and differences to enhance the process. For example, when I used the Foresight example, my friend and I were opposites. I was more of the ideator, the one that came up with all the ideas, and she was the analytical one that judged the ideas and crafted the ideas and put them into an action plan. So us knowing that about ourselves, having completed the Foresight tool, we were able to say, hey, I'm going to probably, tire people out with my list of ideas, but then I'm going to duck away and let the other folks analyze and craft, and so put those ideas into a more linear format where everybody could respond to them. Bobby finds an open door policy enhances team creativity. They don't have to wait for a meeting to tell about an idea that they have. That's awesome. I think it's really important to create an environment that's not just when we show up for a meeting, because another thing, and I anticipate you'll experience this after we're done with this presentation, that as you walk away from the presentation or the content material, ideas will pop up. And I know there's one place where ideas are more fruitful for me is when I'm exercising or walking or on a treadmill or jogging, doing something physical, is when I get ideas for work. Not when I'm sitting at my desk handling paperwork and answering emails. It's when I'm away from the problem or the situation. So being able to encourage ideas outside of the meeting place or outside of the structure of the work environment, or saying sitting at lunch together actually is a really ripe place for laughter and humor, and which is another important piece, in my opinion, as far as environment, is being playful and having fun and enhancing creativity that way. So having an open door policy is certainly a great example to allow for open ideas. AJ comments, simply put, sharing means caring. Raphael, sorry I couldn't get online on my computer and I'm sharing with AJ. Thank you for that. Sure. When we share our ideas, it's interesting that you say that, AJ, because when we share our ideas, we're giving up a part of ourselves, which the brainstorming rules are really important for. Because even though we may not implement all of the ideas that are shared, it's important to let all our team members know that all of those ideas helped get us to this point, and that their ideas may be used in a future situation or a different timeline. So it's important to thank people for their contribution, because our ideas are a part of us. Jaime is back to the leadership styles. This is great. You must be an authority in all this great information about leadership styles. I love it. There are times to be authoritarian, democratic, etc. Leaders depending on the immediate situation in front of us. This actually points me to a book called Creative Leadership, actually. And it actually complements leadership styles and creative thinking skills, and a model for getting leaders to think and enhance their own thinking, and how the two actually go hand in hand. I definitely think I'm a better leader and manager because of practicing creative problem solving skills and tools. Absolutely. And this book underscores that, not only in concept, it also in theory, and backing it up with research and information. It's a rich book. I bet you'll like it. Called Creative Leadership. The authors are Murdoch. Puccio is the primary author, I believe. Puccio, Murdoch, and Mance. And again, I'll be sharing my email at the end of this presentation. So if you didn't get all of that, jot down the title, and I'll definitely send you an email and give you some information. So I've already given you ForesightOnline.com, Creative Leadership book by Puccio, Mance, and Murdoch. And I also wanted to rewind a bit on a Divergent tool, mind mapping, that I mentioned earlier. A little easy to find this one, mindmapping.com or mindjet.net, I believe. Again, are really good tools if you want software mind mapping instead of just doing it on paper or on a grease board, or as you saw in the illustration, on a PowerPoint presentation electronically. AJ's chiming in about a collaborator-style leadership allows us to bring the leader out in those who would normally be lost in the shadows. Absolutely, absolutely. Similar to, I think we're all creative and we all can enhance our creative skills. We all have ability to lead. And we all have ability to lead either a project, an idea, a process, or a people, or a nation. So we all have the ability to enhance these skills. And again, as I indicated in the Creative Leadership book, it actually parallels the two. So collaborative style leadership definitely does allow for others to step up to the plate. Because we know we don't all have the answers, right? So collective experience is helpful. Okay, any other thoughts or comments on leadership and creativity? Excellent, excellent feedback and comments. Thank you. One coming in? Great. AJ comments, using creative problem-solving skills also gives your staff more understanding when you have to be an authoritarian because they know you care. Absolutely. I mean, there are situations where we have to say this is how it's got to be. I remember a time when best practices, quote unquote, was a term used frequently, and many of us didn't even have a clue of what anybody was what that meant. And the team was charged with implementing some of these best practices, whether it was a specific theory, motivational interviewing, for example, or a best practice in opening access and immediately seeing people when they wanted to come into treatment. And using the collaborative style and using the problem-solving model, I actually just went in and sat with my staff and said, this is what we're charged with. We have to do this. We're going to be tested on this. We're going to be asked about this. We're going to be watched. We have to implement some of these best practices. So what does that mean to you? And they shared their input. What do you think we could do? Well, we could try this, we could try that. And they started generating ideas. So you might have a charge that you have to implement and move forward with, but you could still be collaborative in how you go about getting the end result. Jaime says, knowing our colleagues' personality type helps us. Jaime, are you going to do an MBTI training the next time? Knowing our colleagues' personality type helps us to know how to relate to them and them with us to best motivate each other and reduce misunderstandings that kills creativity. Nice, nicely put. What book do you own, Jaime? Creative Leadership, I presume. Great. I'm not shocked. You're very knowledgeable about this stuff. That's great. No others? I have a sample PowerPoint on creative leadership that enhances the outline of the book. I'll share that with you as well if you're interested. So I'm wondering if you've been thinking about a goal or a wish or a challenge and how you might move forward practicing some of the tools, especially practicing some of the tools that you're not familiar with, that you haven't tried before. Thanks, Jaime. I'd be interested in getting an email from you about your reaction to the book. My colleagues at Buffalo State, Puccio, Mance, and Murdoch, who wrote Creative Leadership, are the ones that wrote that book and encapsulated creative problem solving and leadership and how they're very similar processes and skills that we can enhance. Thank you. So I'll continue to take questions and comments. This is really, really great for rich discussion. And as we begin to wrap up and move into taking it forward, what can we do differently? What are we going to do differently? And how do we continue to motivate ourselves to practice creative thinking, practice creative problem-solving tools, and enhancing our teams to do the same? There's been some examples already shared about environment and keeping an open door. I interjected using humor and having fun. I find that actually doing brainstorming tools and divergent tools makes it fun. Sometimes I'll put toys on the table, Play-Doh and quiet things to put music on so that people feel the energy of the room before they even get into it. Bring in snacks, if you will, and make it a fun afternoon. I've gotten more out of a meeting when I've done it that way than sat with an agenda and said this, that, and the other thing is going to happen and who's doing what next. If you have the time and the energy, it really does start to enhance the environment if you haven't already done that. But as we move forward to our closure as well, what are some things, what other things you can do to encourage your staff? Give your staff some of this information. Any comments or questions? One coming in. All right, Jaime's patting me on the back. I'll always take that. Your teaching style motivates, unless you're just speaking in general, I'll take it anyway. Your teaching style motivates me to want to learn and remember things I have learned. This makes for a great class environment. Absolutely, and I thank you for that. And I think it's important for me as a teacher, as a learner, I'm a perpetual learner, I think it's important to constantly think of our environment as a rich environment for learning. Things change all the time in our environment. We know that based on the people that we serve and treat, that things change. The world today in addiction and mental health treatment is so different in some ways than it was 10, 15 years ago. So really opening the environment where everybody shares information. We all have expertise in content, and as we see here, many of you have understanding and knowledge about the creative problem-solving model, whether it was specific or through your experience or through studying leadership or through your practice of being a leader or a manager. So it's important to really create that environment where everybody's sharing their own knowledge and ideas and expertise. AJ asks a question, how do you train a task-oriented leader to not run over their staff and allow them to give their input on how to best get the task done? Well, I'm going to ask this again, see if there's any audience input to the question as well as I contemplate my response. So AJ asks, please respond if you have any thoughts or comments. How do you train a task-oriented leader to not run over their staff and allow them to give their input on how to best get the task done? Any input from the audience before I embark on this one? Josh? No? The first thing that comes to my mind, AJ, with this is going back to the earlier slide that I shared about using the types of language, how we use language. A task-oriented leader is important, but where in the problem-solving model? So depending on your relationship with this leader, I don't know if you're training an audience or a particular leader that you are managing or oversee. Using provocative questions is a helpful way to get people to understand their style and where it fits in the process. So for a task-oriented leader, I might give them feedback directly and say, Sometimes you jump to want to get to the task and maybe try to see how it would be if you slowed down to see what others' input would be about moving forward with those ideas. Or what are some ways that you get your staff to give you input before you get to the solution to the problem? Share some of what we talked about today with regard to not jumping to conclusion and getting into the task at hand and getting into the solution, but exploring more. I'm actually working with a leader, mentoring someone relative to this who is so used to just wanting to get to the task and get it done and get it off his or her plate before moving forward. And I just keep working day by day at saying, can you slow that down a little bit? Can you wait till next week Tuesday and see what your staff says? Can you send an email out and ask someone else? What happened when you implemented that solution? Was it the right solution? Did you find other problems? So it's could be about probing and asking questions of the person or people. One more coming in. Jaime suggests make them aware of their task-oriented style and its strengths and its weaknesses in various situations via feedback. Absolutely. Task-oriented style is really helpful when we're getting ready to put the plans into action. Task-oriented style is really great for the follow-up. Can you bring this to the meeting next week? Can you be the one that's in charge of following up with the action plan? Can you follow up with folks and check in and see if the implementation plan is still working? Do we need to make any changes? Can you report back to us? Give a task-oriented style person lots to do because they like to do tasks. And if you explore the Foresight online, which I'll put out there, if you actually explore this, especially if you like to use style, personality style types of inventories with your staff, Foresight Online actually has a nonprofit rate, and they also have an online tool. It's really quick. It takes 10 or 15 minutes, and you don't have to be trained to do it, just like Myers-Briggs type indicator, you have to be trained to administer. The Foresight Online, you could just read and research and buy the manual if you need it and buy the instruments and use it. And you'll find that your task-oriented style of people, not just leaders, have a very important place in the problem-solving process. Thank you for your comments and questions. So as we wrap up, I'll certainly take more comments and questions because we're going to have some extra time, but I certainly won't keep you captive. If we're finished, that's fine. But just in summary, I just want to go through the obvious. We reviewed the various types of problems. For example, the emergency, visionary, and conflict or disagreement. But we focused today on the visionary type of problem solving. We outlined the creative problem solving model that was developed by Osborn and Parnes, who found that it was a natural process of divergent and convergent tools. And they also studied at Buffalo State College as well that when they taught people creative problem solving skills and tools, it actually did enhance their learning, as we explored in our comments about leadership. Students stayed in school longer, students did better on tests, so that was where there's actually a curriculum that teaches on creative problem solving to enhance people's creativity and problem solving and learning. And it's likened and tied into adult learning and learning principles as well. So we outlined that model briefly. We identified barriers to creativity. Some of them were making assumptions, the judgments, and the overburdened paperwork, and talked about some ways to overcome those barriers. And then we got into divergent and convergent tools and specifically outlined a few of them each and talked about how we might use them. And throughout discussed ways how the tools could be used and ways that we can enhance and explore our creative thinking. So there's no questions or comments at this point. I'm going to ask you to do one more thing to take it forward. And I like to do this and ask you to commit to this. And one of my mentors in the creative problem-solving world always made me promise that anywhere I went to a training or a presentation, even if there was one little morsel that I could take away, promise myself that I'll take it away so that that moment was worth my time and commitment. So, taking it forward, I'd like you to write down 3 to 5 things that you may have learned or relearned in this presentation. And then contemplate 2 things and commit to them. 2 things that you'll immediately start doing and practicing when you return to your work. And then also moving it forward, because this was certainly just about a 90-minute presentation, certainly not enough to get you really practicing your tools and creativity. What else would you need to explore and be open to your own creativity? And as you see at the bottom is my email address if you have questions afterwards. I trust that after this presentation you'll have some thoughts and ideas that perhaps you didn't take the time or didn't pop up in this time frame, but maybe when you're driving home today or when you walk down the hall to proceed with your daily work, that things might pop up. So please feel free to email me if you have questions or need clarification about any of the materials that I shared with you. Jaime asked me if the book name again is Creative Leadership Thinking. It's just Creative Leadership. And there is a subtitle that I can't recall off the top of my head, but I do know that the authors are Gerard Puccio, Mary Murdoch, and Marie Mance, if that's helpful. And if you have any questions or comments, I'll pause for that and we'll wrap up, trusting that you wrote down those things and are going to commit to practicing some creative problem solving. Thank you. Good. We're good to wrap up. Thank you for your energy and your participation.